Chip, thank you so much for coming on. You are a legend in consumer products and consumer brands and building a brand and building a company and building a culture. And, in particular around athletic apparel. I'm wondering, like, to start is like, did you always growing up think that you would be an entrepreneur or get into the athletic apparel space, or what led you to accomplish what you've accomplished so far?
I think these things happen incrementally. I mean, I'm maybe 12 years old and maybe started importing swimsuits from the United States into Canada for competitive swimming and maybe had an experience there. Um, as an athlete, my mom was a sewer, my dad was a phys ed teacher, that I was a big guy, clothing didn't fit me. So there was a desire to make clothing. I think it was probably genetic inside of me. And, um, and so I think, it's a confluence of a bunch of things that had, me have I guess the foundation or the basis to get into this.
Was there somebody you like looked up to or thought of like, hey, like I'm thinking like Phil Knight maybe. Is he like a hero of yours or somebody like you were looking at, or you were just kind of in a silo thinking all of this and kind of going as you said, just kind of as it goes?
Funny enough, when I sold my Surfskate snowboard company in 1997, I think the number one job for me would have been CEO of Nike. But I didn't have a master's degree. I wasn't a finance guy. I was purely a brand product, uh, athlete. And I actually would have been perfect for it. But, boards at that time, especially public, wouldn't have accepted a CEO without, financial qualifications. So, um,
Fascinating.
so yeah. So, and then I forgot the question already, but I thought
No,
that
just
was an
like
interesting
who
sideway.
yeah, just I'm just wondering, like, if you were looking at Phil or some of these other folks who have built kind of these legendary and iconic brands, which Lululemon now is one, without question, or were you kind of just like in a silo and thinking through it, kind of how do you do it differently?
I had nobody. Think because I had a genetic demeanor that's almost stopped me from asking people for help. Um, but I was a reader, and even at the age of 18 and 19, I'd read the top 100 books of all time, and I think that gave me a massive foundation. And as far as Lululemon goes, or even any of my businesses, I think it was Atlas Shrug by Ayn Rand. About how to make a great product, how to treat people in your company really well, how to grow a business, how to handle setbacks. I think this was the teachings of Ayn Rand were probably fundamental to me, but I didn't realize that. I mean, I'm reading it as an 18-year-old, but not really till I reread the book when I was 52 did I see where it had such an effect on me.
Oh, that's interesting. That's really interesting. Atlas Shrugged. And so I know I bet you're getting these questions all the time, every interview you do, and all that type of stuff. And I do want to talk about kind of the future and what you're working on now because I find it fascinating. But what led you 2018 to found Lululemon, create this entirely new category of technical apparel, kind of athleisure, maybe it would be a word for it as well, which is now a $400 billion industry annually. uh, did you I mean, and by the way, that's quick. 2018 was like yesterday.
Well, I think you're talking about maybe 1998,
Oh, yeah,
is
yeah, yeah.
when I started.
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
20 years ago. Anyway, thank you. Your assistant really didn't give you the right numbers there,
Oh,
Clint.
yeah, they actually did say, like, founded it in 2018, but then it says went public in 2007, so that doesn't make any sense. So,
Yeah,
my
right.
apologies.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. Well, what is the foundation for it? I mean, there was, I say that at the time there was Nike and Adidas in
Mhm.
1998, but they were shoe people and they were very male dominated. and I'd come through the surf, skate, snowboard business starting in 1979, the ups and downs of that. And then in snowboarding was really the first time that women got into, um, I'd say, sports. I mean, it's hard to believe, but even when I was in high school, I mean, the cool girls would skip phys ed, to go smoke cigarettes, and there's a big shift in, education for women. And, in 1997, I read a statistic where 60% of the graduates at a university are women. I knew there was going to be a big change. As I said, I went through the surf, skate, snowboard up and downs of that. And then I saw yoga, and I was in a yoga class, and I saw it grow from 6 people to 30 people in 1 month. And then I extrapolated from the circumstances of surf, skate, snow, and went, this is going to be at least as big as those. And so I kind of bet the farm. But I'd say that, the other big foundation is that Nike and Adidas being so male oriented, they didn't even really think about the women's market on any level, even from a shoe point of view. And from a manufacturing of apparel, very mid America points of view on style and design, which with a few pieces they did make didn't really work for women. And then I'd say generally, they were excellent at making shoes, but when it came to apparel, where seams, for example, in between legs, these open seams, and you'd go run a 10K, or Lord knows if you went and ran a marathon, the chafing was unbelievably bad. So it was just they weren't making apparel like they were making shoes. So
Mhm.
that created a big opening, especially when you see that women are probably 70% of the purchasers of athletic apparel and shoes.
And, so you start this thing. I'm super interested in the branding. How did you land on your brand, your overall message, and the overall, "This is what Lululemon is," because I feel like that's what's captured, at least maybe it's from the beginning, is like, feels more like a movement almost. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, my dad was an assistant gardener at the Esalen Institute in Big Sur, California. And I think I learned from him about meditation and yoga. And then he took the S program, which then turned into the Landmark program, which ended up being kind of the basis for the Lululemon culture. One of choice and responsibility, integrity, and by crossing it with the book Good to Great, the psychology of achievement around goal setting, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. We created a linguistic abstraction at Lululemon of about 30 terms and definitions, which then gave us the foundation to be able to grow exponentially when we did.
And, are you shocked by how big the industry is now?
No, if I look back at it, I mean, you could say that in the 1960s, probably men started coming out of the 18 hole of the golf course, and instead of wearing suits into the bar or the lounge afterwards, they'd just wear their golf shirt, which was radical at that time.
Mhm.
And then you probably had executives who were going to go golfing Friday night show up to work, Friday morning, and this would be only the very successful, um, executives, because if you weren't a successful executive, you couldn't show up doing that. But the successful ones couldn't get fired, so they would show up and then go to golf. So it was seen kind of as a status symbol. So and then I kind of look forward to that, and then I go, well, then the surf thing happened probably in Australia, and then it morphed into California, and you have this thing where executives, or if you're in your own business and you're controlling your own life, can surfs up. So then you want to go surfing, and you got to go surfing like at that moment, at that time. And you can't be wearing a suit and tie, one, to kind of get out of it, get into your wetsuit, get out there, and then get out of your wetsuit, and then you're kind of wet and cold. You're not going to get into a suit,
Mhm.
so you're going to get into a t-shirt and hoodie. And of course that took itself into the technology world of California, and that's how, that end of things kind of got going. So am I surprised by the growth of it? I've seen it happen since 1960, and I would say, interestingly enough, at different parts, I didn't know how much bigger it could go. All I know is that on the West Coast, starting in probably 1998, or at least in Vancouver, people stopped wearing suits and ties. People started wearing stretch clothing to work, things that were more comfortable because Vancouver, you walk or you bike to work because it's a very metropolitan, dense city, in the mountains and with lots of rain, lots of sun, that type of thing. So it created an industry like with Arc'teryx, for instance, which is another local Vancouver company about just dressing is just part and parcel. Dressing for business is the same as dressing for athletics.
How did you get the manufacturing and the material and all of that stuff right? I mean, Lululemon has a very unique and distinct fit. You know when you're wearing something made by Lululemon. How
Hmm.
did you get that perfected? I mean, how long did that I'm super interested in, like, the early days, like, how do you manufacture this stuff and be like, "No, that's not good enough. We need this type of fabric," that type of stuff?
Well, it really is the core of it, which I believe a lot of people don't understand. And if I go back to myself being in the surf industry, it was Quicksilver and Billabong that came up from Australia that had a whole different fit for apparel, and especially athletic apparel, because surfers have big butts and big thighs and a small waist, and they're crouching down. The need for a higher back rise and a lower front, and then more fabric around the butt and thighs with less around the waist, created a whole different fit, which was totally different than taking big data across the global sphere about, what is the average size of somebody and of the global population, and then making it for, the middle of that bell curve. So um, so then to actually make clothing that actually fit an athlete and then consequently actually look really good on them, uh, subconsciously became kind of the inspirational look for, like, that represented health, it represented fitness, and it was people who were, athletes like that usually had rosier cheeks, they're better teeth, they just look better. And I think that drove, subconsciously drove the demand for athletic clothing. And then from a fabric point of view, when I had my snowboarding company and women were coming into snowboarding, I made um, a, a, a first layer tight, for women to wear under snowboard pants. And then when I sold West Beach and I started into yoga, I went, oh my God, I have the perfect fabric for this. And so well, it wasn't the perfect fabric for it. It was still too warm for yoga, but I worked on it for quite a while and then perfected it, and then increased the lycra from 3% to 12%. I pre-shrunk it. I put antimicrobial properties into it, anti-stink, and then I probably the bigger technical innovations were around flat seaming. So I bought these machines from that had just come out in Japan that when it sewed, instead of creating an open seam that would give person a rash, it actually flattened the seam and cut off all the excess fabric, so that I could then use seams as kind of a way of designing a garment, because I could take them out from underneath the armpits and underneath the legs and kind of bring them out. And I always had a love for what I'd call West Coast function with Italian styling, where kind of a 20-pound, 30-pound overweight man could suddenly look good because just the tailoring of a jacket or pants was just so well done.
That's super, super interesting. At what point did you feel like you got the product right? You got the fabric right? You got like, "Hey, we're really onto something here."
Well, this is probably the downfall of a creative person, and even as a creative person gets into a board of directors, and you've got you've got a you've got a bunch of uh, you know very well-meaning directors, but they don't they making their decision based on past metrics, where a creator is always thinking 5 years in the future. And I can guarantee you that as a creator, the minute I'm never happy, I'm happy never being happy. In other
Mm.
words, the minute I've created something, I'm no longer happy with it because I know there's always something that can be done better.
In your opinion, what goes into a brand? What makes a great iconic brand?
I'd say number one is knowing who the muse is. And um, so, what do I mean by that? Um, I'm very specific. And so, for for myself, not only for West Beach and then Lululemon, and then for my other businesses that I have now between Arc'teryx and Solomon and Atomic and Wilson out of Chicago, I'm really focusing in on the 32-year-old single professional who is one, they've own if it's a woman, they're owning their own condo, they travel a lot, they're making $100,000 a year, they have they're fashionable, they have time. And what do I mean by they have time? They have the time to work out, time to take care of themselves, because they're no longer like 22 years old and struggling out of university. And that person is looking at that 32-year-old as being iconic. They're not 42 with two children and kind of up to their eyeballs and a lot of, whatever it takes to do that. So that 42-year-old looks to that 32-year-old, and so that 32-year-old for me is exactly the same as saying, well, Nike has Michael Jordan or they had Tiger Woods or whoever they have now.
Mhm.
They picked a particular person and paid them a whole bunch of money, where I created the person out of, basically thin air. And again, mostly having to do with that women were in 1998, 60% of them were the graduates out of one, graduates out of university. Higher education leads to fewer children and waiting longer to have children. So a whole new demographic got created.
Yeah, even as we're talking here, I'm looking at your whiteboard here. It says like to provide components for people to live longer, healthier, happier lives. Um,
Yeah, that's right.
yeah, like is this like the purpose? What we're looking at here?
Well, that's my life purpose. My business purpose is to elevate the world from mediocrity to greatness for 20 to 40-year-olds via transformational development in technical apparel and shoes. So I have that on my board. I make all my decisions based on that. I try not to veer too far from it.
What do you think the future of athletic apparel is? I mean, you're involved. You just mentioned a bunch of brands that you're involved in, and everything you've done post Lululemon. I mean, you must be thinking about this constantly.
Well, and everything I thought about kind of went on steroids with COVID. People, if I look at people kind of post COVID, I don't see anybody in leather shoes anymore. I see nobody wearing ties. It's almost like it's like an archaic way of being. And so I think that people have finally come to the hierarchy of needs, so to speak. And number one is survival, and number two is reproduction. And to do any of those two things requires health. And health comes from epigenetics of eating right, working out, getting a great sleep, and I think living a life that is um, you know has a basis in athletics, or at least mindfulness. And so someone can achieve those a longer life, which I call survival, or more children through reproduction.
So, as you think about like the brands and the companies you're working on now, um, how do you replicate within them what you did with Lululemon and like what? Because it seems to me like you mentioned kind of those first and second things that are most important. It seems to me like the change has been like, hey, we can actually be comfortable all day, right?
Yeah,
Um,
yes. I mean, that's part of it. That would be what I'd call athletic posers. And
yeah.
it's kind of came out of it, which really drives a big part of the financial part of the athletic companies, because where maybe 10% of the people buy stuff for actual athletics, there's probably 90% that buy it to just feel comfortable with. But I always like it because I think the goal is that when those people ever want to be athletic, they have the apparel to do it and nothing to get in their way.
Yeah, that makes sense. So where how are you spending your time these days?
Well, I have real estate business in Vancouver and Seattle that's quite substantial, but my real love is Amer, which the Amer brand owns Arc'teryx, which is here in Vancouver, and I believe makes the very, very best top quality, top of the mountain athletic clothing in the world. I almost call it life and death clothing because they came out of making climbing harnesses and they took that same technology and put it into jackets, and anyone who's had one of those jackets is going to love it for sure. The other one is Wilson out of Chicago, which I'm very proud to own. It has nothing to do with me. It's just a coincidence, but it now has the NBA ball, the NFL ball. We had the best tennis rackets in the world, and now I'm taking the basically everything that I learned through West Beach with the surf skate snowboarding and Lululemon, and now coaching and being a mentor uh, to Wilson, Arc'teryx, Peak Performance out of Stockholm, Atomic out of Austria, and Solomon out of France. Just to part my knowledge. And but the world has changed, and there's younger people in there. There's a lot of digital going on, omni-channel, that type of thing, which is not something I'm intimate with. So I have to I can depart my knowledge, and then people have to take it and work it into the new world, or and take some of it and maybe reject other parts of it because the world has changed.
Speaking of the new world, I'm not sure. Like a lot of people I'm talking to for this show, AI is completely disrupting their whole
Yeah.
business, their whole lives. Is it affecting the actual consumer product industry, the athletic apparel industry at all?
Well, starting about 8 months ago, I definitely introduced the brand product teams to this. And the analog analogy of this was exactly what I said before. The winning formula for my surf skate, snowboard, and yoga brand was to take West Coast functional fabrics and fits and marry them with Italian fit and styling. So, God, now I forgot what I was talking about, Clint.
Oh, no, no, no. We were just talking about AI. Sorry.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So if I look at it like like on an analog basis, I connected two disparate things, which is Italian styling with very dumpy, ugly West Coast, 1980s, 90s, 2000s, functional apparel. So when you look at AI, then this is essentially what it can do in infinitum, and so quickly it can take what I mean, we all know what it'll do. You take a bicycle and you marry it with a truck and you ask it to make it a piece of furniture, and it's spectacular, what it can do. So the and then moving that right from a picture right into a digital 3D scan, and doing a fit on a body for a piece of apparel, and then then doing the grades from extra small to extra large, and then being able to do it again, not just for North American fit, but for an Asian fit, or a Netherlands fit, where they're the tallest people in the world. This is phenomenal. It's kind of like the same, doing a video. I don't even have to do the video anymore. It can do everything for me and give me a animated picture of myself, and I can get something out to my people, but then I can do it in 3 or 4 different languages, and my lips move perfectly into that language, and it makes it feel so real. We're moving really quickly in this, and I'm really excited about it.
It's fascinating, huh? It's scary because I mean, I don't think in our lifetimes we've seen a technology like this. You could argue the internet, but this seems like 100 times the internet.
I,
Um,
I would I would agree. And I love, of course, being a creative person, I love change and I love the disruption. I think it's some people. it's everything's on a bell curve again. You have probably 20% on one people on the bell curve that are super secure, don't like change, and you got the people in the middle, and then you got the kind of the people that are in the creative end on the other side. I can't wait to see how the world changes. I just it's going to be superb.
Yeah, it's an exciting time to be alive. I wonder, like, you built an incredible team, executive team, board, all around Lululemon. Um, how did you think about that? How do you think about recruiting talent? How do you think about, recruiting an executive team?
Well, at Lululemon, I think I did a very, very good job for the first, you know, 6, 7 years when we were in high growth, mostly because our culture was built to bring on executives and have them, I guess, drink the Kool-Aid of our culture. And our culture was, very set in integrity and responsibility. And I I also think I read the book, The E-Myth, just before I started Lululemon, and a big part of that is an executive has to train and develop people and then get out of their way. And that was my mantra, and it worked really well in a high growth company like Lululemon. So these, I'm going to call them 95%, 22 to 26-year-old women, just really took the world by storm. And because our training and development program was so good and people were so responsible, and we could have very, very open discussions about absolutely everything, because through the landmark course, it kind of takes away any personal reaction to what another person may say, because it builds on communication, and our interpretation of what somebody says or does is really rooted in our childhood and what people, our friends, think we should be, or our family thinks we should be, or what our even our genetics think we should be. So by having choice in how we listen and how we communicate, created the ability for these executives to be, I call, best in the world, and probably 20 years ahead of their stage, and really allowed Lululemon to grow at the rate it did.
How do you think about launching a new product within a brand? I mean, what needs to be checked off in order for you to be like, "All right, we're launching this new shoe or new" whatever it is, right? Like, uh, how big of a bar is that?
Yeah, I think maybe you're talking about, I mean, I left Lululemon in 2013, or had, some say in what happened, and they went into skincare products, which was a disaster, and then they bought Mirror in the middle of COVID. That was a disaster. And really, it's not checking the box of what is the business sales model that Lululemon has on the e-commerce and in the store. And in other words, if with apparel, we know it exactly. Like, somebody comes in, they spend 6 seconds looking at a garment. It takes us a minute and a half to describe to that person what the garment does, what it needs. We get them the piece. They get in the change room. They get in and they get out. Um, Tell me again, Clint, where I was.
No, yeah, I was just wondering, like, how high is the bar to launch something
Oh
new?
yeah. So thanks for that. So in other words, like, if it doesn't fit within the system, then it's it's disruptive to the model. You need different types of salespeople. You need different types of floor space, um, and um, and it and then it takes away from the ability to actually sell more apparel. So, as opposed to moving into technology or moving into skincare products, says, what are ancillary apparel projects which you can move into um, that need technology to them? And for an example, you'll see the company Figs that took the Lululemon model and basically put it into hospital scrubs. Very ugly, very unfunctional, very, no stretch, no antimicrobial, very dumpy. And then put fashion towards it and technology, and then So that is something that Lululemon should have gone into as an ancillary business, something that they can leverage all their back end of fabrics and manufacturing and um, presentation, merchandising, design, etc.
How do you think, not to, get you to say anything controversial here, but how do you think acquisitions like Mirror happen with it? Like, is it just like, hey, money's going to be unlimited, dollar's always going to be zero? I mean, because at the time, particularly during COVID, I imagine Lululemon, like so many companies were exploding. Is like maybe this is how it's always going to be, right? How does something like that happen though? Because that really is like a completely different business to hop into.
I would suspect one of the private equity directors inside of Lululemon had an interest in it and probably proposed it and then recused themselves on the vote of it. I think you have Lululemon is such a money machine, and it has always has $1 billion in the bank, and quite frankly, it doesn't have the board of directors that can see the future for and doesn't understand, like I was talking about, the sales process. So there's an incentive for the private equity firms to make money inside of the board of directors, which I'd say is a conflict of interest. And I'd say that um, it um, yeah, I'm just gonna then repeat what I was gonna say, just not a knowledge about how the process inside Lululemon works to make it a viable product. Let me go back a bit. It has too much money sitting in the bank. It doesn't want to give dividends because the minute it gives dividends and it's signaling to the market that it doesn't know where to put its money anymore. So, and it doesn't have the knowledge inside of the company to actually leverage the money to put it into something that would exponentially grow the company.
What's it like watching something you created from the outside? That must be fascinating.
Yeah, it is. It is really no different than having a child. You know, it grows up, it becomes a teenager, it, has its own points of view, and it gets out of the house. It has lots of arguments with the parent. And if it's a male anyway, and males take a long time to mature, and it probably, from 20s to 30s is trying to be its own person and um, you know, divorce itself from its parent to kind of prove itself. And I think that's the stage it's in, and that's the way for me to look at it. It's a natural process.
Was it cathartic to write your book about the founding and the creating of Lululemon?
Yeah, it definitely was, and I quite enjoyed it. Went through lots of renditions of it. And it was my way of I never had the chance when I left Lululemon to leave the foundation which it needed to do to grow in the way that I thought it needed to grow. So my desire was to really provide information for the management and the directors to be introspective and go, like how do we need to operate within integrity and responsibility? Where did the market come from? Where is it going? Who is the customer? And what has made us successful, and can we keep it that route? And instead of maybe going the way of the gap, which it has been led by, as a chairman of the board, Glenn Murphy, in that realm. And I feel it's now merchant led as opposed to design led, and is heading down the same route as the gap. And my goal then with the book was to open the eyes of the directors to see, like, is this actually happening, and how do we need to change so that Lululemon can continue to be a great company.
I'm sure you've talked about this at length and other places too, but just for our viewers, what led you to leave Lululemon?
Well, it was a confluence of things. One was in 2012, I was very unhappy with the way that the business was being run. The board of directors was very happy with the CEO, and the stock kept climbing. But the stock kept climbing because the CEO was putting less money into quality control and raising the prices. And so a disaster was going to happen. So my wife and I moved to Australia and with our family. And we hadn't been there 9, 10 months, and sure enough, Lululemon had a massive quality control issue with transparency in the pants. So we came back, we fixed that, and inside a board meeting, they asked me, what needed to be done, and I said, well, you really need to get rid of the CEO. And then again, we just clashed, and I think the CEO at the time had a her tentacles deep in Machiavellian principles, and knew how to knew how to had a different agenda in the background with the directors. Somehow, even though the quality control disaster had happened, the stock, still continued to do well. And I think they were unwilling to admit they didn't have a successor for the CEO, and they didn't know what to do. And they didn't want to put me in. So, and then about, maybe about 8 months later, was doing uh, an interview on Bloomberg, and I had a misstep, I guess, in the way that I said things, and I was probably one of the first people to get canceled, and that kind of gave the CEO the ability to again further push me off of being chairman, and then my we were kind of we were disenfranchised with the board and the CEO, and my wife and son went and started a new company, and the board thought it was a conflict of interest, and that my wife and son were doing it, and then so they set up a different um, committee within the board. So I was part of the board, but 2 minutes after the board meeting, then they created another distinct committee that actually then ran the company. So then I was excluded, and then I just went, well, I need to kind of move on with my life, and I left.
How did you take all of that? I mean, that seems like just from a mental health perspective, that must have kind of rocked your world to have to go through all that.
Yeah, I made my mistakes. I mean, I was the one responsible to get myself into that. I lost control of the board. Um, And so, I'm responsible. I get it. But at the end of the day, I sat there and I went, I've got a great family. I'd like to spend a lot of time with them. And do I really want to spend my time with the board of directors who I don't think is, the right people for Lululemon, who would, it'd be a life of frustration and conversation. And I think it was, 9 against 1, and I wasn't going to win, and it wasn't a life I wanted to live. Um, so I mean, from that point of view, it's all turned out perfectly.
What led you to Vancouver? I'm fascinated by that.
Well, I guess my dad was from Calgary, went down to BYU and went to school, married my mom. We were in San Diego and LA, moved back to Canada when I was 5 to Calgary. And after I'd started West Beach, my surf skate snowboard company, I formed a partnership with two other guys, and they were in the sailing business, and they were wanted to sell my West Beach clothing through their sail business, and we ended up partnering up because they knew sales, and they knew banking, and they knew accounts receivable and payable, of which I knew nothing. It seemed to be a great way to learn all that type of business, and to especially expand at a time when, instead of like being 7 years ahead in the surfing business, now every company and every athletic store in the world was going to carry surf clothing. So I did that. And part of that then was moving to Vancouver, where the sailing business was. And if you've ever been here, it's very tough to move anywhere else but maybe Sydney, Australia.
That's incredible. Your dad went to BYU, huh? Like I'm 10 minutes away from BYU campus right now. So there's an interesting connection. Did you guys ever live in Utah?
Well, maybe my joke is my dad went there to play football, and my mom went there because of communist infiltration to California universities, according to my grandpa. And so, I was born April 25th. So they didn't know each other very long before my mom was pregnant, and then shotgun marriage in San Diego, and never went back to Utah.
That's awesome. That's incredible. By the way, can't thank you enough for coming on here. I like to end every interview with the same question, and I'm super excited to hear yours. At CEO.com, we talk a lot about chances that are given are just as important and equal to chances that we take. So chances we take on ourselves, are incredible, and that's the whole, like you mentioned, Atlas Shrugged, Nine Rand, that's the whole thing, right? Like, being able to take a chance on yourself and, putting yourself out there, that's what entrepreneurship is and leadership is. But there's this whole, other side of that, which is chances we give or chances that were given to us. And I just wonder
Mhm.
if there's anyone in your life who gave you a chance,
Mm.
that, made an impact on where you are today and who you are today.
Well, it's 2 people kind of in the same story, and one of them was I was maybe 17 years old after my halfway through my second year of university, and I met a woman in the airport who was a friend of a friend, so to speak, and talked to her for about an hour. And she said she was going to Alaska because her husband was running one of the 5 sections on the Alaska oil pipeline, which was one of the, I think, the largest free enterprise project in the world at the time. And she offered me a job. So I don't know if she saw anything in me, but that changed the trajectory of my life because I made so much money there. But the second part of that is I was had been there for about a year, and I was a hard worker, and I would do anything for anyone anytime. And it was kind of like it was a union mentality, and that wasn't very well received. And so there was a job that I had that I was a laborer in the labor union. The Teamsters wanted the job, and they kind of arranged to have me moved out of my job, and so they could take it. So I'm out of a job, and I'm sitting there in the middle of Alaska and nothing to do. And but this other gentleman came up to me, said, I've been watching you over the last 3 or 4 months, and I understand you're out of a job. You're a hard worker, and I need someone like you." And I think at that age, so I must have been 18, maybe early 19, that really cemented in my life that there's there's a direct correlation between hard work, integrity, responsibility for the job, wanting, not lowering myself to the union mentality, but raising myself above it. And I think I can't say enough for that particular moment.
Chip, I can't thank you enough for spending the time that you spent with us. Highly recommend everybody read your book. I think it's super fascinating. I'm going to keep following you and all of these various ventures you're in, and I'm excited to see where it goes.
Well,
Appreciate it.
thanks a lot, Clint. Appreciate it very much for your time.